Donald Trump has delivered a major salvo in his trade war, this time aimed squarely at Canada.
Canada's been a very difficult country to deal with over the years.
The government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach,
The air crackles with tension across the U.S.-Canada border, where a trade war has erupted with the ferocity of a summer storm. At the heart of this economic tempest is a $22 billion clash, sparked by former President Donald Trump's audacious salvo, a 50% tariff hike on Canadian steel and aluminum. This wasn't just a policy jab. It was a calculated strike aimed at reshaping North America's industrial landscape. Canada, under the steely resolve of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, didn't blink. Within 48 hours, Ottawa retaliated with surgical precision, slapping an equivalent $22 billion in tariffs on American goods, from electric vehicle motors to the aluminum sheets that shape beer cans. The fallout was immediate. Prices spiked, supply chains groaned, and tempers flared on both sides of the border. For millions of Americans already grappling with inflation's relentless grip, the impact landed like a sucker punch. Yet beneath the surface of soaring costs and diplomatic barbs lies a deeper question. Has the United States, in its quest for economic dominance, jeopardized a fire that could scorch its own ambitions for a green, electrified future? Or is this merely the opening gambit in a high-stakes game of global trade chess? The origins of this clash are rooted in the intricate dance of interdependence that defines U.S.-Canada trade. For decades, the two nations have been economic bedfellows, their supply chains woven so tightly that a tug on one side ripples across the other. Roughly 90% of the steel and half the aluminum fueling American factories flow from Canada, a lifeline for industries from automakers to beverage giants. When Trump's tariffs hit, they didn't just raise costs, they sent shockwaves through this delicate ecosystem. Electric vehicle, EV motor prices surged 12% in just 3 trading days. Aluminum, the backbone of everything from soda cans to truck frames, spiked to $3,500 per ton on the Chicago Board of Trade, a peak not seen since 2022. Beverage companies caught in the crossfire warned that summer discounts might vanish as they scrambled to absorb the blow. For automakers like Tesla and GM's Ultium division, the math grew grim. The U.S. tax credit for EVs, capped at $7,500, was meant to usher in a green revolution. But with metal costs soaring, that incentive risks becoming a mirage, swallowed by the very policies meant to protect American industry. Trudeau, a leader known for his measured demeanor, didn't hesitate to counterpunch. "We didn't ask for this fight," he declared, invoking a hockey metaphor that resonated with Canadians. "But when someone drops the gloves, we're ready." His government's response was swift and symmetrical, targeting American goods with tariffs that mirrored the U.S. blow dollar for dollar. The hit list was expansive: electric vehicle motors, F-Series pickup steel frames, aluminum sheets, and more. It was a masterclass in economic retaliation, designed not just to inflict pain but to expose the folly of Washington's approach. Trudeau dismissed the White House's national security rationale for the tariffs as a flimsy pretext, accusing the U.S. of cloaking economic aggression in the guise of protectionism. The numbers backed his case. Canada's reliance on American goods is significant, but the U.S. depends just as heavily on Canadian resources. This mutual vulnerability turned the tariff war into a game of mutually assured disruption, with both sides bleeding from the same wounds. The ripple effects were felt far beyond the border. In Canada, the EV market took a direct hit. Samsung SDI, a key supplier of battery components, reported rising costs for aluminum-coated anode foil and copper separator films, materials processed in Indiana and Michigan now burdened by Canada's retaliatory tariffs. For American automakers, the pain was equally acute. The cost of motors, batteries, and critical aluminum components skyrocketed, squeezing profit margins to the bone. GM and Tesla, while holding off on price hikes, admitted that second-quarter earnings would be razor-thin. The irony was stark. A U.S. policy meant to bolster domestic industry was choking the very companies it aimed to champion. Experts dubbed it the $22 billion earthquake, a seismic shift that rattled supply chains and threatened to derail North America's electrification dreams. Packaging lines strained under the weight of higher costs, raw material prices soared, and automakers absorbed the shock just to keep factories humming. Yet all signs pointed to this being only the opening act of a much larger drama. Trudeau seized the moment to pivot from defense to offense, unveiling a bold strategy that married economic resilience with environmental ambition. At the heart of Canada's counteroffensive was the Green Steel Fund, a $4.8 billion initiative to modernize the nation's steel industry. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction but a calculated move within Canada's broader $8 billion net zero accelerator program, aimed at slashing emissions in heavy industries like steel and EV battery production. The numbers told a compelling story. Two flagship mills, ArcelorMittal Dofasco in Hamilton and Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, had already consumed $2.2 billion of the fund. Dofasco's $1.8 billion overhaul would transition its operations to a hydrogen-based electric arc process, slashing 3 million tons of CO2 annually. Algoma's $420 million upgrade would shift to 70% recycled scrap metal, forging a tighter link with Detroit's EV ecosystem. With $2.6 billion still to deploy over the next 18 months, Trudeau's goal was nothing short of revolutionary: to cut North American steel emissions by 60% before 2030, positioning Canada as a global leader in clean industry. This transformation wasn't just about economics, it was a strategic masterstroke. Canada's steel, powered largely by Quebec's clean hydroelectricity, became both a weapon and a shield. Every ton of steel now carried a carbon passport, documenting its energy source, emission levels, and raw material origin. This transparency wasn't just a bureaucratic flex, it was a direct challenge to American producers, many of whom rely on coal-fired furnaces that can't compete with Canada's cleaner model. Ottawa doubled down with a $1.5 billion emergency package to bolster Quebec's aluminum smelters, a move to shore up domestic industry as the trade war intensified. But demand was ferocious. Within a week, nearly all of that support had been claimed, forcing Canadian officials to consider expanding the fund. If the U.S. tariffs persisted through the summer, factories could face liquidity crises by winter, a prospect that hardened Canada's resolve. Trudeau's strategy extended beyond tariffs and subsidies. On March 13, Canada escalated the fight to the global stage, filing a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization, WTO, case DS-635, accusing the U.S. of violating trade norms with its steel and aluminum tariffs. The move was symbolic yet potent. The WTO's appellate body, crippled by U.S. resistance to appointing new judges, couldn't deliver a swift ruling, but the lawsuit drew international attention. Canada wasn't alone in its grievances. Japan and South Korea, also stung by recent U.S. duties, were watching closely. Internal U.S. Commerce Department data shared with Tokyo and Seoul hinted at a potential alliance of clean steel nations, a coalition that could amplify pressure on Washington. If these countries united in court, the U.S. trade stance could face a reckoning, exposing the fragility of its protectionist gambit. On the home front, Canada tightened the screws. Starting July 21st, all federal infrastructure projects would use only Canadian steel and aluminum, a move that effectively locked out U.S. suppliers burdened by the 50% tariff. Ottawa also imposed a third-country import quota to block Chinese steel from entering Canada via American exports, a safeguard against backdoor dumping. These measures forced manufacturers into a stark choice: pay the premium for tariff-laden U.S. materials, or pivot to Canada's greener, albeit pricier steel. For automakers and packaging giants, the decision was increasingly clear. Canada's clean steel offered a path to compliance with emerging global standards, like the European Union's carbon border tax, which promised rewards for low-emission supply chains. The brilliance of Canada's response lay in its three-pronged approach. First, it matched U.S. tariffs with precision, signaling that Canada wouldn't be bullied. Second, it poured billions into modernizing its steel and aluminum industries, turning a trade war into an opportunity to leapfrog competitors. Third, it wielded global legal pressure to expose the U.S. as an outlier in free trade. This wasn't just about pushing back, it was about redefining North America's industrial future. Canada positioned itself as the indispensable backbone of a green supply chain, leveraging Quebec's hydroelectric power for nighttime steel production, developing hydrogen facilities in Labrador, and eyeing export markets in Japan and Korea. Each move was a calculated step toward economic and environmental dominance, a vision that contrasted sharply with the U.S. inward-looking protectionism. The stakes couldn't be higher. If the U.S. holds its course, the cost of every F-Series pickup rolling out of Texas could rise by nearly $850 in materials alone, a burden that would ripple through showrooms and wallets. Meanwhile, Canada's carbon-neutral steel is already finding buyers in Europe, where the EU's carbon border tax rewards low-emission producers. The contrast is stark. While the US risks pricing itself out of the green economy, Canada is carving out a lucrative niche. Trudeau's gamble is that tariffs alone can't reshape a market. Strategy can. By investing in clean tech and rallying international allies, Canada is turning crisis into opportunity, forcing the US to confront the consequences of its own policies. Yet the horizon holds darker clouds. If the US doesn't back down, Trudeau has hinted at escalating the fight, potentially targeting copper, lithium, and EV batteries, resources critical to the clean energy transition. Such a move could ignite a broader trade war, one that would set back North America's electrification goals by years. The $22 billion earthquake has already exposed the fragility of the continent's shared economic framework. For American consumers, the pain is immediate. Higher prices at the pump, the grocery store, and the dealership. For automakers, the dream of a green future is buckling under the weight of policy missteps. For Canada, the path forward is clear. Build cleaner, smarter, and faster than its southern neighbor. This trade war is more than a battle over steel and aluminum. It's a referendum on the future of North America's economy. Will the U.S. double down on protectionism, risking its role in the global green revolution? Or will it seek a compromise, recognizing that interdependence, not isolation, drives progress? Canada, for its part, isn't waiting for an answer. With billions flowing into cleaner mills and a legal fight brewing on the world stage, Trudeau is playing a long game, one that could redefine the continent's industrial landscape for decades to come. As the tariffs bite and the stakes rise, one thing is certain. This is no ordinary trade spat. It's a clash of visions, with the future of North America's economy hanging in the balance.